Hey, I want my own casino. Hey, I need my own casino. Hey, I want my own casino. Hey, I'll get my
There you go. I'm
own
John Kane, and I welcome you to Let's Talk Native on this Tuesday, January 7th, 2020. We're just getting started here. Um, we're just getting started here. Well, this program ended up provide a path to spiritual enlightenment. We do encourage and, in some cases, start conversations. We break the rules for Native radio. We don't do prayers or buffalo speeches. We take a tough look at history, oppression, and survival. We talk about culture, the arts, politics, and identity. And we may step on a few toes along the way. But our real goal here is to bring people together by breaking down what separates us. We will take on the false narratives and provide critical thinking to all that is heaped upon us. And we do it all right here from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. So let's talk Native. But before I do, before we get started, let me remind people that you can listen to this show via our website, which is www.letstalknative.com. You can watch video of this through our Facebook live streaming on our Facebook group pages and the group pages that we share it to. We take the audio and we put it up on SoundCloud, and it goes out as a podcast to all your favorite podcast platforms. We take the video and we put it up on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. So you can look for our podcast. You can subscribe to those and to our YouTube channel. You can follow us on Instagram at Let's Talk Native TV. And you can follow us on Twitter at Let's Talk Native. All right. Is that better? All right. So, look, there's a lot of stuff going on today, and the news can be a little overwhelming. And I addressed a little bit of my concern about stuff going on with Trump and his march towards war and that kind of stuff. And now Iraq has retaliated, and so there's going to be a lot of stuff out there. There's not a whole lot that you can really talk about at this point that's going to be confirmed and factual. So I'm not even going to go there. That wasn't my plan to talk about that stuff today anyway. And frankly, everybody else is going to be talking about it. But something that I've covered quite a bit on the show has to do with gaming and our battles, Seneca Nation in particular, battles against New York State over gaming compacts. I think it's important that people realize that the Seneca Nation is not the only people who are challenged and faced with some of the problems that states have brought down on against Native people, especially states who have been trying to tap in and squeeze Native gaming for their own purposes, for their own revenue. Excuse me, I gotta take a drink here. Sorry. Okay, there, I'm all better now. The state of Oklahoma has been trying to squeeze big time, and here's the kind of the sad part. What Oklahoma's hoping to do is to do what New York has done to the Senecas. They want to ratchet up and get and squeeze the Native casinos in Oklahoma for the same rate that New York State has gotten, which was 25%. Not just from the Senecas, but from the Oneidas, from the Mohawks. So that's what Oklahoma's trying to do. They see the standard and the bar that New York set, and that Mohawks, Oneidas, and Senecas have agreed to. And so Oklahoma's trying to squeeze them for that. And they were getting, I don't even know what the percentage was, but I think it was below 10% of the slot drop as far as revenue sharing. But what I'll say is they weren't giving anything in exchange, really. I mean, it's a little tougher for the state of Oklahoma to talk about offering exclusivity and saying and assigning a value to it that could have these higher percentages. But so he was the governor. His name is Kevin Stitt, by the way. Ironically, Kevin Stitt is supposed to be supposedly, I guess, and if I get this wrong, he's Cherokee, and I think he's an enrolled Cherokee from Oklahoma. And he's the governor of the state, and he's the one who tried to squeeze the Cherokees and everybody else. So, what the 800-pound gorilla in the room on all of this is a state trying to utilize what they view as the mandatory state tribal compact to make native gaming legal. And it's the same thing New York State's doing. New York State's saying, look, if you don't pay us, then we won't renew the compact. And frankly, Seneca Nation and others have conceded to that. In fact, there are lawyers recommending to the Seneca Nation, let's negotiate a compact and we'll make sure that it's permanent. That way we never have to negotiate again. I mean, they don't even, I mean, their lawyers are suggesting to the Seneca Nation, give them something and then give it to them forever. And then you don't have to worry about whether they try to squeeze you for more money later, like the governor in Oklahoma is doing, or ever have to revisit. It'll just be the cost of doing business. I mean, a ridiculous cost. I mean, the Seneca Nation has paid the state of New York $1.5 billion, practically $1.5 billion for an exclusivity that never really existed and doesn't exist. But let me get back to Oklahoma. So in Oklahoma, as this governor was really trying to squeeze these guys, a bunch of the native territories, led by the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, and the Choctaw, have said no. In fact, we're going to sue. And so, and I'm not saying that this was the best approach either, but what they did is they said we're going to sue in federal court, and we're going to sue to make the federal government acknowledge that you can't walk away from a compact. They're essentially suing to say that the compact automatically renews, whether the governor tries to walk away or not. And the governor's saying, no, I'm not going to renew the compact because I want to squeeze you for more money. I want to get you up to 25% like New York State gets. That's what essentially what the governor of Oklahoma is asking for. And so what happened is essentially the compacts in Oklahoma expired at the first of the year. So the question that is always looming over this subject is whether if a compact expires, will the state be in a position to shut the casino down or casinos down? And that has been the fear, right? That's the fear that, frankly, even the Seneca Nation had. I mean, to back this thing up, between 2009 and 2013, the Senecas stopped paying the state because they felt like the compact was being violated, or the exclusivity provision. And so they said, no, we're not going to share revenue as long as you're competing directly against us. And so the reason they settled was because there was the belief among the president of Seneca Nation and the council that if they didn't make a settlement on that impasse, and they gave the state of New York $400 million to end the impasse. They kept $200 million, but they paid the state of New York $400 million, and they did it because they said we had to do an offer of goodwill so the state would renew the compact in 2016. So that's what they did. They essentially viewed their position as being in a weak position that says, no, we have to pay, otherwise the governor will walk away from and this is Governor Cuomo, Democrat, by the way, in New York. So there's this like unwritten or unspoken extortion that exists. And it's almost worse if you have an operating gaming facility, because you feel like if you don't accommodate the governor, then he just won't renew the compact. And again, the fear is that if the governor doesn't renew the compact, that you got to shut down. Now, there's nothing in the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act that says that. There's nothing that says that empowers a state to say, all I got to do is walk away. That's all I got to do. All I got to do is walk away, and then I don't have to shut you down. And I guess they believe that the feds can come in and shut them down. Now, and again, there's no language that suggests that can happen, but it's never really been tested until now. So now you've got these casinos operating in Oklahoma with, for all intents and purposes, an expired compact. One that the governor says doesn't exist. The Governor Stitt in Oklahoma says, no, there's no longer a compact between the state of Oklahoma and various native gaming operations. So part of what my message to Senecas is buck it up a little bit, guys, and you should be following what's happening in Oklahoma and other states, by the way, because I think New Mexico also had there was a battle over a state overreaching. I mean, I think it was New Mexico. What the state was trying to do was saying, we want to even get paid a percentage of any of your promotional credits that you give through your Players Club cards and that kind of stuff. So if you give free plays, you got to pay us 25% of that too. I mean, that's how greedy these guys are. They even want to tap into the promotional you know gaming that takes place. I mean, it's really kind of absurd. But because so why does all this confusion exist? Well, the confusion exists for a really simple reason. Because the agency that is responsible for enforcing the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, not against Native people necessarily, but them too, but against the states, to make sure the states don't overreach. Because let's keep in mind, the reason that Congress claims that they needed to pass the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, because once the Supreme Court ruled a year prior to when they passed this thing in 1989, once the Supreme Court ruled in 88 that a gaming operation in California, that the state couldn't shut them down because Native people had the right to do the gaming, then all of a sudden Congress said, well, geez, if they really have the right to do this stuff, we better put something in place. And they claimed that they had to put something in place to protect Native people because obviously we're incompetent. But they had to do it to protect us. And who are they protecting us from? Well, first, of course, organized crime. We gotta protect Native people from organized crime. We gotta make sure that they don't get bankrolled and then get owned by the mob. And who was the other mob that we were being protected from? The states. So according to Congress, when they passed the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, it was supposed to protect us from states. It was supposed to lay out what the states' rights were and what they weren't. One of the rights that they don't have is to tax us. The Indian Gaming Regulatory Act does not allow a state to tax. So for all of you who listen, and look, I know some white people listen to this show too. But Native people, if you believe that the state has the right to tax your gaming facilities, you're wrong. White folks, non-Native folks, if you think that when a Native gaming casino or gaming facility opens up, that the town, the city, Niagara Falls, whatever, that the Seneca Nation, for instance, has to pay you, you're wrong. They don't. There is no requirement under the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. In fact, it prohibits the states from imposing a tax against Native gaming. However, and of course there's always a however, what it does permit is for the tribes, for the Native gaming interests and the state to enter into something that could be mutually beneficial. So they could enter into a revenue sharing agreement. But again, according to IGRA, well, according to the Interior Department, and again, that's the agency that's responsible for enforcing this thing. According to the Interior Department, they have what they call the test to determine whether a state is really trying to tax Native gaming. And here's what that test is. The test is the state providing something that is both substantial, meaning worth it for the percentage that of revenue sharing they're going to get, and of course, is it quantifiable? Because how would you know whether it was worth it or not? So what it says, the state has to concede something of value, of substantial value. And that substantial value has to be a value that's not just equal to what the Native gaming enterprise pays, but actually it has to be advantageous for the Native gaming interest in the Seneca Nation, for instance. It has to be in their best interest to say, all right, yeah, what the state's giving me is worth something, so I'm going to pay them something. That's going to enhance my business. Now, if you pay them more than what it's worth, then it doesn't do anything good for your business. So, again, what the Interior Department's test was, states, you have to provide something that is both substantial and quantifiable. Now, the problem that the Senecas ran into is what the states offered wasn't worth it, especially since the states violated not just the spirit, but literally violated the whole notion of an exclusivity provision when they started putting slot parlors in right next to where the casinos were at their racetracks, their horse racing tracks. So This is the battle that the Senecas, got into. But now, again, back to Oklahoma. Now, in Oklahoma, there the state of Oklahoma wasn't overreaching as far as New York State was reaching. They weren't asking for 18, 22, and then 25%. They were asking for something smaller than that. But everybody's looking over the shoulder and saying, man, the Senecas paid the state of New York 1.4, almost $1.5 billion. Would have been more. It would have been 1.6 billion, over almost 1.7 billion, if the Senecas hadn't kept that $200 million, by the way. So if they hadn't really pinned back the state for essentially breaching the compact, but then they went ahead and continued paying them. And so what does New York State want? They want another $1 billion. So Oklahoma, New Mexico, and various other states are saying, hey, we want what the state has. We want what New York State has, I mean. We want to squeeze them the way New York State squeezes the Senecas. And again, to be clear, the Senecas pay a lot more than Oneida and St. Regis, I should say. And it's because they're bigger operations. I mean, Oneida has opened up several other operations. They have their main casino, but then they've got a couple other gaming sites. But I think they opened up 2 other gaming sites. But they're nowhere near as big a company or an industry as or they're not as big in the industry as the Seneca Nation is. The Seneca Nation has 3 relatively substantial gaming facilities, one in Niagara Falls, one in Buffalo, the city of Buffalo, within the city of Buffalo, I should say. It's on Seneca land. And then, of course, one down on their territory in Allegheny. So they've got 3 good-sized gaming facilities and Class 2 gaming, too. So they've got a pretty good, big gaming operation. But again, so Oklahoma is squeezing, all of these guys. And again, I got to remind people that the governor claims to be Cherokee. And I'm not saying that, I'm not saying allegedly or anything else. If he says he's Cherokee, I believe he's Cherokee. But you know what? If I'm the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, I disenroll him. I say, no, you're committing treason. You may be an enrolled member, but you're the governor of the state of New York, and you're trying to take money from us. I mean, Cherokees have disenrolled people for less than that, simply because of skin complexion. So, man, if I was the Cherokee Nation, I'd just flat out tell the governor that he was persona non grata, as they say, and say, no, you're not welcome here anymore. But that's me. So my message, to the Senecas is, not only should you be filing amicus briefs, depending on how you want to say that, in the case that the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, and the Choctaw have filed against the state of Oklahoma, but they should be monitoring this thing, and they should be signed on to a whole nother campaign, because there's a couple of things going on. As I said, one of the biggest problems is that the Interior Department isn't doing their job. In fact, it's not just they're derelict; they're actually refusing to do it. So even when you ask them, even when you ask the Interior Department, look, will you look at the gaming compact? We have a problem here. In fact, we think that they're breaching it, and that these gaming compacts no longer meet the test that was required to prove that they're not taxing us. Some of these states, like Oklahoma, they even refer to it as a tax. They don't even beat around the bush. I mean, it's and again, a tax is prohibited, but you can't get the Interior Department to step up. And that's not just because it's the Trump administration. The last administration wouldn't do it either. The Interior Department is completely derelict, and actually, because they refuse to address it, and I'll tell you, the Seneca Nation tried to get the Interior Department involved, and they said, well, we hate to get involved in this thing unless both parties want us involved. Well, how stupid is that? That's like saying that if somebody's a victim of a crime, the guy who committed the crime has to want the police involved too. I mean, it's a ridiculous criterion that the Interior Department says that has to be met. In a way, and so what they says, if you force us, though, if you sue us, then or you somehow get a federal action going that requires us, then maybe we would do it. So perhaps that's what comes out of this thing. But again, what I think the Seneca Nation has to do, and others should jump on, I mean, anybody who is being squeezed for revenue sharing from a state should be really jumping on this thing and saying and trying to press the Interior Department to do their jobs. Because if they just look at it, if they just take an honest and objective look at what the standard is for revenue sharing, they know that New Mexico's not meeting it. They know that Oklahoma's not meeting it, and they know that New York State isn't meeting it. And I got to think that there's a lot more states than that. But these are just the three that I'm aware of. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I don't work for the Seneca Nation. I'm not involved in the National Indian Gaming Association or any of that stuff. But I'll tell you, it doesn't take a rocket science to see what the overreach is by the governors of some of these states. And you know, an awful lot of people say, "Well, they can't do that. It's against the law." Well, it is against the law, but unless you've got an agency that's willing to enforce the law, unless you can call them out on the breach of the law, then it doesn't matter that the law is in there if it's not being enforced. And that's what the situation is now. But again, part of what is playing out in Oklahoma right now is finally there is a place where a state has refused to renew a compact, and the native gaming interest says, "Well, we're not going to concede to your demands. We're just going to continue as if the old compact renewed. You know, we're not going to let you elevate the rates that you're trying to squeeze us for." So in Oklahoma, you have these gaming facilities that are operating. According to the state, they're no longer legal, but they're operating anyway. And this is again for some of the conversations that I've had back here. This has been the fear that the Senate has had. Well, look, if we don't play ball with the state, they'll shut us down. And I've argued all along that the state doesn't have the power to shut you. Not only do they not have the power because of political will and the fact that the Seneca Nation is one of the largest employers in Western New York and all of that, but that's not the way the law was written. And you know, look, I hear this all the time from people say, you know, the native gaming should just go back to class 2 and then they're not required to do a compact. I think that's giving up too much. And while that is a fallback position, and that I don't necessarily think that should be our threat. That should be our threat that we put out there. Look, worst case scenario, we're going to do class 2. So you can't shut us down because we know we can operate under class 2. So that doesn't serve the state very well either. You know, so I think that should be our, bluffing position, I guess. But the main thing that we should be doing is we should be fighting them. And there should be no requirement to have a revenue sharing agreement. And the Senecas can go on and without a revenue sharing agreement. When we come back, I'm going to take a break here in just a bit. When I come back, I want to read a little bit of a statement from Governor Stitt because it's interesting because he said how disappointed he was that that the Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Choctaw took him into court because he had a different solution. And I'll talk about what he wanted to suggest and why it's why it kind of makes me smile and chuckle a little bit that this was his great solution to the problem. But we'll do that when we come back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. We'll be right back after. We'll do a little bit of John McLeod, and we'll be right back. Again, see you in a bit.
I'm a blast from the past. Do you hear my engine roar? I'm a blast from the past. Just let that engine roll. And when you hear me coming, I'll have that pedal on the floor. Them northern lights are cold. They're telling me to come on home. The howling of the 53 is winding. She keeps me rolling on. I'm a blast from the past. Do you hear my guitar play? I'm a blast from the past. She slides from Houston to LA. And when I stop playing, they lay us both away. I'm a blast from the past. I need new strings, she needs oil. I'm a blast from the past. We both need rest before we boil. But with a little bit of loving, we'll make it to the show. I'm a blast from the past. Do you hear my engine roar? I'm a blast from the past. Just make that engine roll. And when you hear me coming, she'll have that pedal on the floor. Put it on the floor.
All right, a little blast from the past from John McLeod. It's always good to catch up with some of John's music, and I know John listens, so this one's to you, John. Look, I want to thank our sponsors. Let's Talk Native is sponsored by Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses, Eric White and ERW Enterprises, and the good folks at Grand River Enterprises and Native Wholesale Supply. Those are the guys who sponsor me on a regular basis, every month or every week. And of course, I've got some other friends of the show who make a contribution from time to time, and it all helps. It all helps do what we do here. What also helps is when you guys share the show and you guys participate in the show with your comments on Facebook or your comments. Look, when you go to YouTube and you watch our videos, you can leave a comment there too. I sometimes forget to check those comments, but I do check into them. So whether we're doing videos of our shows or some of our short form videos, which, by the way, we got another really good one coming out on the mascot issue the next couple of days. So you'll see that soon. We always look for your comments. But again, one of the things that really helps us do what we do here is when you share. When you share the video content, when you share the audio content, you share the podcast, the YouTube videos, the Facebook Live videos, all that stuff helps us get the word out. I am not a media sensation, and so I have no illusions of my own grandeur at all here. I know that I have hundreds of listeners, not thousands of listeners or millions of listeners. I wish more people would participate in the conversations because again, what we're trying to do here is either begin conversations or advance conversations. So what we want to do is up the level. I mean, and bring in either information or a history or perspective that you may not have considered before, so you can further the conversation beyond what we're doing here. And the only way that works is if you share it, if you share the content. So the more people who are, if not familiar with the show, at least familiar with the conversations that you carry on beyond the show. So that's what we hope to do. And I know some of you do that, and I greatly appreciate it because, frankly, that's why I do it. So I want to thank all of you. All right, I mentioned before that I wanted to read a statement from this governor Stitt, and he issued this before the I think actually before the compacts expired. So this is what he wrote. He says, "I'm disappointed that a number of Oklahoma tribes, led by the Chickasaw, Cherokee, and Choctaw nations, did not accept the state's offer on October 28th for a 3-person arbitration panel to resolve our dispute outside of court." Stitt said in a prepared statement, "This was a capstone action to their numerous refusals to meet with the state and begin negotiations on the model compact, gaming compact, to ensure a win-win for all parties by the end of this year. I was elected to represent all 4 million Oklahomans, and I will continue to be laser focused on the outcome that achieves a fair deal and is in the best interest of the state and its citizens." So, of course, he doesn't mention that he's, he does throw it out there that he's Cherokee. Well, he's not Cherokee here. He's representing white folks, and he's not look. You're not going to take from Native gaming to give back to Native people. That's the opposite of what you're taking the money for. But the interesting thing is, he was trying to convince these guys to go into binding arbitration with a 3-person panel, and it's like the Senecas are saying, "Well, wait a second, better look over here. Remember what happened to us?" And the interesting thing is, one of the judges for the Senecas was Kevin Washburn, who is Chickasaw. He's from Oklahoma, and so to the extent that any of these guys may be asking, Washburn, and Kevin Washburn was the only decent arbitration panelist for the Seneca Nation, but it didn't matter what his view was because he got overridden by the 2 white guys, which is exactly what would take place here. So the fact that Cherokee, Choctaw, and Chickasaw said, "No way in hell we're going to let you shortchange us with some, kangaroo court that what the Senecas went through." I mean, to be clear, the white guys on the Seneca's arbitration panel, they violated contract law, the norms of legal principles by saying, "Look, the language in the compact didn't say that the Senecas had to continue to pay, but we think they have to, even though it doesn't say it." They violated what they call the 4 corners doctrine of contract law, and they basically said, "We're going to tell you have to pay, even if the compact doesn't." So, what the Senecas were trying to argue, especially with the Interior Department, is you need to make a ruling on this compact because this arbitration panel just rewrote it. This arbitration just rewrote the compact, and they did so by adding terms that we didn't agree to. We didn't agree to it in 2000 from the very beginning. We never agreed to this, and now you got 2 white guys who were never a part of the process, who didn't even bring in representatives who were a part of the negotiation in the beginning, which would have been the George Pataki administration. They just relied on Andrew Cuomo's opposition to the whole thing. So the good news is that again, the folks, the Chickasaw, who again Kevin Washburn's people, and the Cherokee, in spite of one of their favorite sons being the governor, and the Choctaw. And we can get into the Choctaw too, but these guys said no, we're not going to get ourselves into a panel where we can't have a bigger input onto who these judges are. Now, I'm not suggesting that everybody's going to get a fair shake in a federal court, and I think where these guys are going is trying to get probably a fairly narrow ruling to say, look, the state can't just end a gaming operation by walking away from a compact. That's essentially what they're suing over. And the hope is that a federal court's going to say, Interior Department, you get your asses in here because you've got some explaining to do. How are you letting this stuff go so badly? Now, the Senecas tried to do that, and the court says, you know what? You guys went to binding arbitration. Again, that 3-panel thing. So what the federal court says, you guys already participated in a process that you agreed to enter into, this binding arbitration. So we're not going to hear anything. So it's not that the court ruled in favor of the state. They just said, no, Senecas, you can't even bring this in here. Now, I think the Senecas still have some recourse because while the Senecas can't go into federal court to appeal what this arbitration ruling said, what the Senecas can do is just refuse to pay, because what the arbitration panel said is you've got to continue to pay because it's our opinion that you're getting something of value from the state and you're not paying for it. And that's essentially what their arbitration panel ruled. Now, by virtue of saying that, if the Senecas refuse to pay, and they get the state can drag the Senecas into federal court. That's within the compact agreement, and try to force them to pay. And I think this is a recourse for the Senecas, because if they go into federal court and they say, look, what this arbitration, we're not asking you to reevaluate what the compact says, but now we're into another area, because regardless of what the compact says, it's illegal. It's illegal because we aren't getting anything. We aren't getting anything of value. The arbitration panel may have said, we think you're getting something of value, but they never assessed whether the exclusivity provision was of value. Was it worth $1.5 billion that they paid already? Was it going to be worth another $1 billion going forward? But if the court is going to try to force the Senecas to pay based on an arbitration panel saying that they're getting something of value, well, then that opens up that can of worms. So I think the Senecas should just continue to refuse to pay. They should support what's happening in Oklahoma. They should be pressuring the Interior Department. And look, I'm at least glad that that in Oklahoma, those guys have enough courage to stand up to the state. Because again, had the Seneca Nation really been upfront, and when their compact renewed and said to the state, you do realize, and of course, if the state was upfront too, the state knew that there was no language in there for payments to continue for to the next renewal period. But the Senecas could have said, to be clear, we're renewing this compact, and there's no language about it. They could have it up front, but instead the Senecas, no, we don't need to bring it up. If there's no language in there, there's no language in there. And why didn't they bring it up? Well, the answer's simple. It gets back to what I said earlier. Because they were afraid that the state would refuse to renew the compact. And the fear, and their lawyers are telling themselves, we don't know. We don't know if the state walks away from a compact, and they're still worried about it for 2023 when this one renews. They said, if a state walks away from a compact, we don't know if you guys can operate. I mean, they can't even give a straight answer. How is it that the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act was passed in 1989? How could we be this far in, 30 years later, and still not know how much authority the state has to force the native gaming not only into a compact, but because there's a revenue sharing provision, they can say, if you don't share your revenue with us at the rates that we want you to share it with us, we'll shut you down by not renewing a compact. I mean, there's no language in the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act that says that. But all of these so-called gaming experts, these law firms that solicit their services to everybody, including the Seneca Nation, the same ones that negotiated really, really shitty compacts, all these law firms who claim to be Indian gaming experts, they can't even give you a goddamn straight answer on whether a state could shut you down if they walk away from a compact. 30 years into this law, 30 years into native gaming under the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, and nobody can give you a freaking straight answer. Well, my hat's off to the folks in Oklahoma who are at least standing up to their governor, because there's not enough courage to stand up to in some of these states. And I'm not saying that these guys in Oklahoma are doing it all right. I mean, I think there should be. I think they should cancel. Everybody should cancel revenue sharing agreements with the state, because if the states, see, here's the whole thing. The claim is that when the state provides you some level of exclusivity for operating gaming, that has a value, and that's why some of these places are paying millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, the Seneca Nation was paying at one point as high as $100 million in a single, $200 million in a single year, $200 million in a single year. If they have to go forward, that's about what it would look like for the next period, the next 7-year period. It'd be another close to, I mean, it'll be close to $200 million a year, $150 million a year anyway. And that's what New York, Niagara Falls, Buffalo, and City of Salamanca are all chomping at the bit saying, oh, we all get a piece of that. But they should be paying nothing. The state doesn't provide them with anything of nearly anywhere close to that value. And nor is the governor of Oklahoma, the state of Oklahoma, providing. Look, we have to do this stuff on our own. The only thing the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act did for Native people was make vendors more willing to contract with us, because they were protected. Now there was no more question about whether Native gaming was legal, because in state by state, in various places, you had some states that were claiming, no, it's all illegal, and we're going to go after anybody's gaming license if they deal with Native people. That's what IGRA solved the problem for white people. We had the right to do gaming, and the Supreme Court even backed that up. They didn't give us that right; they recognized it. So what does Congress do? All right, we're going to trim some of that. Yeah, you got the rights. The Supreme Court acknowledged it, so we're going to take some of those rights away, and we're going to do it this way. We're going to make sure that you gotta slip in bed with the governor of the states that you're operating in. That's literally what IGRA did, and we need to peel that back. We need to have. It's not that we can't get along with the state; we just can't be oppressed by them. And again, I'm at least glad that those guys in Oklahoma are taking a stronger position. I mean, look, in Florida, I mean, there was some gaming down there where guys had really excelled at Class 2 gaming in direct defiance, because the state of Florida would not negotiate a compact. So once they build out their Class 2 pretty big, all of a sudden the state says, all right, we'll negotiate a compact. And so what happened? These, Seminole and Miccosukee, they said, all right, we'll negotiate it. Instead of really pinning back the state of Florida, they ended up signing a compact with them anyway. And I don't know what their revenue sharing deal is, but we are too willing to give in to the states. And look, I know the Senecas are pushing back, but I know what their lawyers are telling them. They're saying, no, it's the cost of doing business. Enter into a compact. Let's smooth this over. Whatever's got to happen. If we have to pay, we have to pay. And then in 2023, let's negotiate a compact that's perpetual. That whatever we agree to pay, we'll pay forever. I mean, how absurd is that? I mean, give you an example. How much money do you pay into a state that uses that money against you? In Oklahoma, from what I understand, this Governor Stitt, he's actually using the gaming revenue that he's still getting from these gaming territories to fight the legal battle against them. I mean, it's almost like, it's not like this Cherokee this guy who's an enrolled Cherokee who sits in the governor's mansion in Oklahoma isn't committing treason against the Cherokee Nation that he claims to be a part of, because no, I'm not responsible to you. I'm responsible to what do they say? 4 million Oklahomans. Yeah, 4 million Oklahomans. That's who I'm responsible to. But then he takes the money from Native gaming and uses it to fight Native gaming. I mean, the irony is almost too thick. And and that's what we see in New York State. So I bring this thing up, and I wanted to mention this. And I know a lot of people think that everything in the news cycle, everything on radio, has to be about Trump and and Iraq and Iran and all that stuff. And I'll talk about that when I need to talk about that. My biggest concern is how it impacts us. And this gaming stuff, it impacts us. Look, I'm not Seneca. I don't collect any royalties or any annuities or any payments or anything else. I'm not on anybody's payroll here. But I know when you have an aggressive state, and that was the claim. IGRA was supposed to protect us from aggressive states and aggressive governors. But it's not. And when you have an aggressive state, they can try to ruin your business. And if you're if you live under this fear, this cloak of fear that says, well, if I don't play nice, I mean, to give you an example, how compliant and how subordinate the Seneca Nation has even been with New York State. So when New York State was trying to pass a constitutional referendum or amendment so they could do open casinos and compete directly against Oneida and St. Regis and the Seneca Nation, the Seneca Nation's lobbyists, the folks that are supposed to represent them, said, you know what? The state would really like you guys to contribute to their campaign to amend their constitution. And I'm like, what? What did you just say? You want the Seneca Nation to throw, and they wanted the Seneca Nation to throw millions of dollars. They said, yeah, if the state would buy a lot of goodwill from the governor if you'd contribute several $1 million into their campaign for a public referendum to change the gaming laws in New York State. And the Senecas did. They didn't give millions. I mean, they gave an amount so they could say they gave an amount, but they didn't say hell no. I think they gave it. I don't know. It might have been $50,000. It was tens of thousands of dollars, not hundreds of thousands. From what I understand, I mean, if you're a Seneca, you should ask that question. You should ask the question. So, how much money did we give to New York State to help them in their campaign to compete against us? That would be an interesting question to ask. And, of course, it's not on me to ask, but I know they gave something. And I know what their lobbyists were telling them. Oh, yeah, throw $1 million at the state. They greatly appreciate it. Now, look, it's real easy for people to think that when you're talking about paying the state $150 to $200 million a year in revenue sharing for nothing, to throw an extra $1 million on something else to buy some goodwill what's $1 million? Well, I know one thing. To the average Seneca, and I know to this Mohawk, $1 million is a lot of money. Now, I'm not willing to sell my soul for it. But the idea that the Seneca Nation, under the advice of their lawyers and their lobbyists, by the way, not just these lobbyists, not just these Albany lobbyists, but their lawyers says, yeah, that's probably a good idea. Yeah, that's probably a good idea. Go ahead and give the state some money so they can help in this campaign, so you can help their campaign to pass a constitutional amendment so they compete against you. And by the way, they did. The Senecas gave, I don't know, $50,000 or so. The state had the referendum. The public, New Yorkers, passed an amendment. Now, the reality is, native gaming already did a huge service to the state of New York because they were the ones who conditioned the general public to say, yeah, gaming is not a bad thing. In fact, the state residents voted for it because they saw, okay, the native people are doing all right. It doesn't seem to have any detrimental effects, although, gaming does have detrimental effects. But the overall scheme of things, native gaming was the only thing that helped this referendum pass. But that wasn't enough. No, we want you to give money too. And the Senecas did. And so what does the state do? They open up a casino actually in the same gaming market as the Senecas. They over by Rochester. Right on the edge of what was supposed to be this exclusivity zone. But it doesn't matter that it was on the edge. It's still tapping the same market. They advertise in Buffalo. They advertise in Western New York for their Del Lago Resorts and Casino. And so how did Del Lago come into existence? Senecas helped. Not only did they grease the skids for a referendum, they greased it a little more because their white lawyers and lobbyists suggested they do it. Well, I'll tell you, I'm not a white lawyer, I'm not a white lobbyist, but I'm telling the Seneca Nation, I hope that you are not your lawyers. I hope the Seneca Nation is talking to some of these folks in Oklahoma. Because you guys need to know what you're up against. And look, maybe maybe in Oklahoma, it's all white lawyers fighting for those guys too. And don't get me wrong, I understand the power of assimilation. I mean, what the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma declared that they were a Christian nation last year through a referendum or through a council resolution. That's disturbing all by itself. But and I know I've seen some of the actions that's come out of some of these Indian Reorganization Act, these reorganized tribes of Oklahoma. Oklahoma's a pretty red state. And when people ask for, oh, wouldn't it be great to have a native president? You know who you'll end up with somebody like Kevin Stitt. Yeah, he's Cherokee. He's native. Yeah, he could be your first native president, and he'd be an ass, and he'd work against your interests. Why? Because he doesn't care about the Cherokee. His concern is 4 million Oklahomans. I've said it before, but look, there's been a native vice president, heartbeat away from the presidency, and he was terrible for native people. Oklahoma, they've got one of their congressmen is I think there's two. Actually, I think there's two congressmen from Oklahoma who are native, and of course, the Republicans. That's the kind of person who's going to run for president. The assimilated type. Oh yeah, you mentioned Mark Charles. Mark Charles, he's a Calvinist preacher, for crying out loud. You think his biggest concern is native sovereignty? No, his biggest concern is whether we can be more Americanized and can have equal rights with Americans. I don't care to have equal rights with Americans. I'm not fighting for constitutional rights. That's not what we do this show for. We do this because we are distinct. Our identity is not Native American or American Indian. It's not defined by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Indian Reorganization Act, or any of the treaties that the United States has violated. We get to decide how we're defined. So, again, I hope that the folks in Oklahoma stand strong against their governor, and man, I hope their stance helps the Senecas get the courage to stand up strong enough against Governor Cuomo, so they are no longer just deer in the headlights over the idea that if the governor doesn't renew a compact in 2023, that they're shut down. I'm hoping that's what these guys in Oklahoma prove out. That if a governor tries to walk away from a compact, that doesn't empower him to have a casino shut down. So we'll have to see how that plays out. So hey, just kind of a heads up. I'm heading to New York. It'll be my first trip to New York in the new year. I'm looking forward to a good show. We do it's a 2-hour show in New York. It's on WBAI in New York City. It is a talkback show, so we're gonna have an hour of phone calls. If you listen to this show and you want to participate in the show directly in New York City, then I hope you'll tune us in. You can listen online at WBAI.org. We will Facebook live stream that show in New York, just like we do here in Seneca territory. So you can listen to us live either on Facebook, or if you're in New York City, you can listen to us on the radio, middle of the FM dial, 99.5 on the FM dial, WBAI. Or like I said, you can listen to us streaming at WBAI.org. And I'd love to have I'd love to have some callers from my Let's Talk Native listenership. So if you're free on Thursday from 3 to 5 in the afternoon, then listen in and give us a call. We do calls for the whole 4 o'clock hour, and I'd love to have some folks join me from my Let's Talk Native crowd. We cover some of the same issues, but we also offer a Native perspective to issues that affect us all, including the folks who live in New York City. So when we get some colorful callers, some people who are very supportive, and some who think that I'm just too angry, and that I'm too angry at white people, and so we have to address that. So it'd be great to have some of you folks who listen and participate in Let's Talk Native join me on Let's Talk with John Kane on WBAI in New York City. That's it for now. Obviously, as we go forward and we see the impacts of global conflicts and how much they impact us, as I said in the last show, I'm really disturbed that Native people enlist in the armed forces at the level they do. But you know what? I have friends who aren't Native, whose kids are enlist as well. Um, and so, I mean, I actually know a young man who, little town in Pennsylvania, who may get sucked into this thing. So I have some, some personal and firsthand acquaintance that has me disturbed about this, and there's nothing funny about the idea of people getting killed, and when you have rich white men who get to decide who lives and dies in another country, and then when that country retaliates, they aren't retaliating against Donald Trump. They're going to retaliate against, you know, and whether they're completely innocent or not, but they're going to retaliate against young kids who thought that the military was a good option for them. So we'll see what happens. All right, that's it for me. We'll see you on Thursday, hopefully, and we'll be back here on Saturday. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Yahweh.